I've always been the type of person who overthinks simple tasks, like returning a borrowed laptop. Most people would just toss it in their backpack and hand it over the next time they saw their friend. But me, I'm the guy who sets 3 phone reminders and writes it on a sticky note, because the thought of forgetting something that belongs to someone else keeps me awake at night. That's exactly why. I found myself walking up the familiar brick pathway to Jake's house on a Thursday afternoon. In late September, his MacBook Pro tucked carefully in my messenger bag. The programming project was finally done. 40 hours of debugging Python code that should have taken 20, and I wanted to get his laptop back to him before I inevitably forgot it in my dorm room for another week. Jake and I had been best friends since middle school, bonded over our shared love of terrible sci-fi movies and our mutual inability to talk to girls without stammering. His house had become like a second home to me over the years. I'd spent countless afternoons in their basement playing video games, eaten probably 100 dinners at their kitchen table, and survived more sleepovers than I could count. The 2-story colonial with its green shutters and perpetually neat garden was as familiar to me as my own childhood bedroom, but Jake was at his part-time job at Best Buy until 7, and I knew waiting until tomorrow would mean another day of mentally carrying around the task of returning his laptop. Better to just drop it off with his mom and be done with it. I rang the doorbell and waited, shifting the weight of my bag on my shoulder. The late afternoon sun was warm on my back, and I could hear the faint sound of water running somewhere inside the house. Probably the washing machine, I thought. Maybe someone was doing dishes. The water sound stopped, and I heard footsteps approaching the door. Light, quick steps that I recognized as Mrs. Chen's, though she'd always insisted I call her Alina. Ever since I'd turned 18, and she'd decided I was too old for formalities. The deadbolt clicked, the handle turned, and the door swung open. I'm not sure what I expected to see. Alina in her usual business casual attire, maybe, her comfortable weekend clothes. What I definitely didn't expect was to find myself face to face with Jake's mom wrapped in nothing but a white bath towel. Her long black hair damp and clinging to her shoulders, droplets of water still visible on her collarbones. We both froze. Elena's dark eyes went wide, and I felt my face immediately burn red. For a moment that lasted approximately 1,000 years, neither of us moved or spoke. I was acutely aware of everything. The way the towel was tucked securely just above her chest. The light scent of her lavender body wash. The fact that she was clearly mortified, but trying not to show it. "Oh my God," she said finally, one hand instinctively checking that her towel was secure. "Alex, I'm so sorry. I thought you were the delivery driver. I've been waiting for a package all day." No, I'm sorry," I stammered, taking a half-step backward and nearly tripping over my own feet. I should have called first. I just wanted to return Jake's laptop, and I thought, "It's fine." "It's completely fine," she said quickly, though her cheeks had flushed pink. Despite her obvious embarrassment, she managed to smile, that same warm, genuine smile that had welcomed me into their home countless times over the years. I just jumped out of the shower. Terrible timing. I stood there awkwardly, unsure whether I should leave, wait outside, or pretend this whole thing never happened. The logical part of my brain was screaming at me to mumble an apology and come back later. But Alina seemed to recover her composure faster than I did. "Stand there looking mortified," she said with a soft laugh. "Come in while I grab a robe. I don't want to keep you standing on the porch like some kind of criminal." Before I could protest, she stepped aside and gestured for me to enter. I hesitated for a moment, then stepped into the familiar foyer, careful to keep my eyes focused on the family photos lining the hallway wall rather than on Alina as she hurried up the stairs. "Make yourself comfortable," she called over her shoulder. "I'll be right back. There's coffee in the kitchen if you want some." I stood in the entryway for a moment, processing what had just happened. This was Alina, Jake's mom, the woman who had driven us to soccer practice for 3 years, who made the best chocolate chip cookies in the neighborhood, who had given me advice about college applications and listened patiently to my anxieties about choosing a major. She was also, I was suddenly and uncomfortably aware, an attractive 42-year-old woman who had just answered the door in a towel. I shook my head, trying to dispel the thought. This was ridiculous. I was here to return a laptop. Nothing. More, I made my way to the living room and settled onto the familiar gray sectional sofa, placing my bag carefully on the coffee table. The house was quiet, except for the sound of Alina moving around upstairs. I found myself looking around the room as if seeing it for the first time, taking in details I'd never really noticed before. The way the afternoon light streamed through the sheer curtains, the carefully arranged books on the built-in shelves, the framed photos of family vacations and Jake's school achievements. Much better. Elena's voice came from behind me, and I turned to see her descending the stairs. She had changed into a navy silk robe that fell to just above her knees, her damp hair now loosely braided over one shoulder. She looked composed and elegant, as if the awkward encounter at the door had never happened. "I really should have called first," I said again, starting to rise from the couch. "Nonsense," she said, waving me back down. "You're practically family. Besides, it's not like you haven't seen me in worse states. Remember when I had that stomach flu 2 winters ago and you boys had to bring me soup?" I smiled despite my lingering embarrassment. "You were pretty pathetic that day." "Exactly. So a towel is really nothing in comparison." She settled into the armchair across from me, tucking her legs underneath her. "Now coffee?" "I just made a fresh pot and I was about to have some anyway." "Sure. That would be great." She disappeared into the kitchen, and I heard the familiar sounds of mugs clinking and liquid being poured. I pulled Jake's laptop from my bag and set it on the coffee table, running my hand over its familiar silver surface. The project it had helped me complete felt like a distant memory now. Alina returned with 2 steaming mugs and handed one to me before settling back into her chair. "So," she said, "the programming assignment is finally done?" "Finally," I confirmed, wrapping my hands around the warm ceramic. 40 hours of debugging for what should have been a simple data analysis project. "I think I rewrote the sorting algorithm 6 times. Jake mentioned you were struggling with it. He was worried about you, said you'd been spending every free moment in the computer lab." I felt a familiar warmth at the knowledge that Jake had been thinking about me, worrying about my stress levels. We looked out for each other that way. Had since we were kids. It's done now, thankfully. And his laptop survived the ordeal without any permanent damage. Lena laughed, the sound light and musical. "I'm sure Jake will be relieved. He treats that thing like it's made of gold. For good reason. It's got better specs than half the computers in the lab. His father insisted on getting him the best when he started college. An investment in his future, he called it." There was something in her tone, just a slight shift, that made me look at her more closely. "Speaking of which, how are you finding this semester? Last time we talked, you were stressed about choosing a major." I took a sip of coffee, perfectly brewed as always, and considered her question. "Better, I think. Toward computer science with a focus on artificial intelligence. It feels like something I could actually see myself doing long term." "That's wonderful, Alex. You've always been so thoughtful about these big decisions. Jake could learn something from your approach."
Oh.
"Jake knows what he wants. Business administration, marketing focus, follow in his dad's footsteps." "Does he, though?" Elena asked, and again, I caught that slight edge in her voice. "Sometimes I wonder if he's just choosing the path of least resistance." I wasn't sure how to respond to that. Jake had always seemed confident about his future plans, but then again, he'd never been one to share his deeper doubts. Even with me, Elena seemed to realize she'd ventured into potentially uncomfortable territory. But listen to me questioning my own son's choices. He's young, he has time to figure things out. "We all do," I said, and she smiled at that. "Exactly. Though sometimes I feel like time moves so much faster than it used to." She paused, staring into her coffee mug. "When did you boys become adults? It feels like yesterday you were 12 years old, trying to convince me to let you stay up until midnight on school nights. We wore you down eventually. You did. Jake inherited his father's persistence, but you had this quiet determination. That was somehow even more effective." She looked up at me, and I was struck by how tired her eyes looked, despite her smile. "You still have that quality. It's going to serve you well." There was something in the way she said it, something that made me feel seen in a way I wasn't used to. Alina had always been kind to me, welcoming and maternal, but this felt different, more personal somehow. "Jake's lucky to have you as a friend," she continued. Especially with everything going on at home lately, I frowned. Everything going? Annalena waved a hand dismissively, but I could see she regretted bringing it up. Oh, you know how it is. His father's been traveling more for work. 3 weeks out of every month, sometimes more. Jake pretends it doesn't bother him, but she trailed off, and I found myself studying her face, really looking at her, maybe for the first time. Lena had always been beautiful in that effortless way some women managed: high cheekbones, expressive dark eyes, the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. But now I noticed the subtle signs of strain around her eyes, the way her shoulders seemed to carry a weight I'd never noticed before. It must be hard, I said quietly, being alone so much. She looked up at me, surprised by the directness of my observation. For a moment something passed between us, an acknowledgement, perhaps, of a loneliness I was only beginning to understand. It is, she said simply. But that's marriage sometimes, especially after 20 years. The honesty in her voice caught me off guard. I'd never heard Alina speak so candidly about her personal life, never seen this vulnerable side of her. Made me want to say something comforting, something wise. But I was 19 years old and had never been in a serious relationship. What could I possibly offer? Instead, I found myself sharing something I'd never told anyone. My parents have been fighting a lot lately, too. They think I don't notice. But you can feel it in the house, you know? Like there's this tension just underneath everything. Alina nodded knowingly. Children always know, even when parents think they're hiding it well. You and Jake are both perceptive that way. Sometimes I wonder if it would be easier if they just admitted things weren't working instead of pretending everything's fine. Honesty is terrifying, Alina said softly, especially when you've built your whole life around a certain version of the truth. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't try. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the afternoon light shifting through the windows, casting new shadows across the room. Listen to me, Alina said finally, shaking her head with a rueful smile. Getting all philosophical with you, Win? You just came by to return a laptop. Jake would laugh at us both. I don't mind, I said, and realized I meant it. It's nice, actually. Having a real conversation, I mean. She studied my face for a moment, as if trying to decide something. You're growing up, Alex. When did that happen? Gradually, I think. Then all at once. Lena laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise her. That's very wise. Did you come up with that? I wish I could take credit, but I think it's from a book. Well, whoever said it first was right. She stood up, smoothing her robe. I should let you go. I'm sure you have studying to do, and I have a conference call with Hong Kong in an hour. I glanced at my watch, surprised to see that we'd been talking for almost 45 minutes. It had felt like 10. Right, of course. I stood and gathered, my bag leaving Jake's laptop on the coffee table. Alina walked me to the door, and I found myself not wanting to leave. The house suddenly felt very quiet, very empty. Thank you for the coffee, I said as she opened the front door. And for, the conversation. Thank you for listening, she replied. Not everyone would have. There was something in the way she said it that made me pause on the threshold. Alina? Yes. If you ever need someone to talk to, I know I'm just Jake's friend, but ... I trailed off, not sure how to finish the thought. She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes completely. That's very sweet, Alex. I might take you up on that. I hope you do. I walked back down the brick pathway, acutely aware that she was watching me from the doorway. When I reached the sidewalk, I turned back to wave, and she lifted her hand in response before closing the door. As I walked back toward campus, I found myself thinking about the conversation, replaying certain moments, certain expressions on Elena's face. The afternoon had started as a simple errand and had somehow become something else entirely. I wasn't sure what exactly, but I knew something had shifted. By the time I reached my dorm, I had convinced myself I was overthinking things. Alina was Jake's mom, a family friend, someone who had been kind enough to listen to my college anxieties and share a bit of her own perspective. Nothing more complicated than that. But that night, as I lay in bed trying to focus on tomorrow's assignments, I kept thinking about the way she had looked in that silk robe, the honesty in her voice when she'd talked about loneliness, the moment when she'd asked when I had grown up. And for the first time in my life, I found myself thinking about Jake's mom in a way that had nothing to do with Jake at all. 2 weeks later, I was halfway to Jake's house when my phone buzzed with a text that would change everything. Sorry, man. Got called in to cover someone's shift. Rain check on studying? I stopped walking and stared at the message, standing in the middle of the sidewalk like an idiot. We'd planned to review for our economics midterm, and I'd already mentally prepared myself for 3 hours of Jake's terrible study habits and his mom's occasional interruptions offering us snacks. I was 20 minutes from campus with nothing to do and nowhere particular to be. The reasonable thing would have been to turn around and head back to my dorm. Work on my AI ethics paper, maybe catch up on reading for philosophy class. But something made me keep walking toward Jake's house. Some impulse I didn't want to examine too closely. I told myself I was just being polite. Elena had mentioned she was making dinner when I'd texted Jake earlier to confirm our study session. It would be rude not to let her know he wouldn't be coming home, that she didn't need to cook for 3 people at least. That's what I told myself. As I rang the doorbell, Elena answered the door in dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater. Her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She looked younger somehow, more relaxed than she had in her silk bathrobe 2 weeks ago. "Alex," she said, surprised but smiling, "did Jake forget to tell you he's working tonight?" "No, he texted me. Just thought I should let you know in person. In case you were making dinner for 3. How thoughtful." She stepped aside to let me in, and I caught the scent of garlic and herbs wafting from the kitchen. I actually did make enough pasta for a small army. "You wouldn't want to help me with the leftovers, would you?" I should have said no. Should have made some excuse about homework or plans with other friends. Instead, I heard myself saying that. "Sounds great, actually. Perfect." I was dreading eating alone again. The words slipped out so naturally that I almost missed the weight behind them. Again. How many nights did Elena eat dinner by herself in this big house? She led me to the kitchen, where I could see a pot of what looked like homemade marinara sauce simmering on the stove and fresh pasta waiting to be cooked. The whole room smelled like an Italian restaurant. "This is way too fancy for a Tuesday night," I said, settling onto one of the bar stools at the kitchen island. "I had a frustrating day at work," Elena said, adding the pasta to a pot of boiling water. "Cooking helps me think." I may have gotten a little carried away. "Frustrating how?" She paused, stirring the pasta thoughtfully. "Do you really want to hear about corporate marketing drama, or are you just being polite?" "I really want to hear." She looked at me with that same searching expression I remembered from 2 weeks ago, as if trying to decide whether I meant it. Whatever she saw in my face seemed to convince her. "We're launching a campaign for a client, a tech startup that's developed this revolutionary sustainability app, something that could actually make a difference, you know. But the executives want to focus the entire campaign on how using the app will make people look good on social media, not on the environmental impact, not on the real benefits. It's just on the superficial Instagram appeal." She pulled 2 wine glasses from the cabinet and held up a bottle of red wine. "Is this okay? I know you're not 21 yet, but I won't. Tell if you won't." She poured 2 modest glasses and handed me one. "The worst part is, I suggested the social media angle 6 months ago. Back then, it felt clever, strategic. Now it just feels ... empty. What changed?" Elena took a sip of wine and leaned against the counter. "I did, I think. Or maybe I just started paying attention to what I was actually doing with my life." The pasta timer went off and she moved to drain it, her movements efficient and practiced. I found myself watching the way she moved around her kitchen, comfortable and graceful, and had to force myself to focus on our conversation. "How long have you been in marketing?" I asked. 15 years. Started right after Jake was born." She began plating the pasta, adding the sauce with an artist's attention to detail. "I was going to go back to school eventually, get my master's. In environmental science? That was the plan anyway." "What happened to the plan?" "Life happened. Jake needed stability. David's career took off, and suddenly 15 years had passed." She set a plate in front of me that looked like it belonged in a magazine. "What about you? Still thinking about AI? More than thinking? I'm obsessed, actually." I took a bite of the pasta and nearly groaned with pleasure. "This is incredible, by the way. Thank you. Tell me about the obsession." So I did. About my fascination with machine learning, about the ethics courses I was taking, about my dream of working on AI systems that could help solve climate change or medical research. I talked more than I usually did, more than I ever did with my own parents, who saw my major as either too complicated to understand or not practical enough to support. Alina listened with the kind of attention I wasn't used to receiving. She asked follow-up questions, made connections I hadn't thought of, challenged me on points I'd never considered. By the time we'd finished our pasta and moved to the living room with our wine glasses, I felt like I was talking to a peer rather than my best friend's mother. "You light up when you talk about it," she said, curling up in her usual spot on the armchair. "It's wonderful to see someone so passionate about their future. Sometimes I wonder if I'm being naive. Jake thinks I should be more practical, choose something with guaranteed job security. Jake's risk-averse like his father. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not the only way to live." Alina swirled the wine in her glass, watching the liquid catch the lamplight. "I used to be a dreamer too. I was going to change the world. Save the environment, make a real difference. You still could." She looked up at me, surprised. "I'm 42, Alex. I have a mortgage and a son in college and a career I can't just abandon. So you're brilliant. You have 15 years of business experience, and you clearly still care about environmental issues. It's not a dead end. That's a foundation." Lena stared at me for a long moment, and I worried I'd overstepped somehow. Then she smiled. Not her usual polite smile, but something softer and more real. "When did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise. I just think you're selling yourself short." David would disagree. He thinks I'm having some kind of midlife crisis. The mention of Jake's father created a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Elena's expression tightened, almost imperceptibly, and she took a longer sip of wine. "Is that what he calls it when someone wants to feel fulfilled by their work?" David believes in stability above all else. He's worked for the same company for 20 years, climbs the ladder one rung at a time, never questions whether the ladder is leaning against the right wall. Alina caught herself looking embarrassed. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't be talking about this with you? Why not?" "Because you're Jake's friend, not my therapist. Can I be both?" She laughed, but there was something sad in it. "You're very sweet, Alex, but you don't want to hear about my marriage problems. Actually, I do." The words came out more intensely than I'd intended, and Alina looked at me sharply. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, but I didn't take it back. "Mean," I said more carefully. "You listen to me talk about my parents fighting? Seems only fair. That's different. You're 19. You're supposed to have complicated relationships with your parents. I'm a grown woman complaining about choices I made. You're a person who's feeling stuck. Age doesn't make that less valid." Alina set down her wine glass and really looked at me. The same searching look from earlier, but deeper somehow. Not what I expected. What did you expect? Jake's goofy friend who plays video games and eats all my snacks? She smiled. Not someone who challenged me to reconsider my entire life philosophy. "Sorry to disappoint." "You're not disappointing me, Alex. You're surprising me. There's a difference." Something in her tone made my pulse quicken. The conversation felt like it was moving into territory I didn't quite understand, but I didn't. "Want it to stop? Can I ask you something?" I said, "Of course. You happy?" Alina blinked, as if the question had caught her off guard. That's a complicated question." "Is it?" She picked up her wine glass again, buying herself time. "I love my son. I have a comfortable life, financial security, a successful career." "That's not what I asked." "No," she said quietly. "It's not." She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her wine. I can't remember the last time someone asked me that question. Even David. Especially David. David assumes that if all the external markers are in place, nice house, good job, healthy family, then happiness is a given. He doesn't understand that you can have everything you're supposed to want and still feel empty. The word hung in the air between us. I wanted to say something comforting, something wise. But I was 19 years old and had never felt the weight of decades of compromise. Instead, I found myself moving from the couch to the chair. Next to hers, close enough that our knees were almost touching. "You're not empty," I said quietly. "You're just underutilized." Alina looked up at me, and I was struck by how close we were sitting. Close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. Close enough to smell her perfume, something light and floral that I'd never noticed before. "You have such faith in people," she said softly. "Don't lose that. I have faith in you." For a moment, neither of us moved. There was something electric in the air, some current I didn't fully understand but could feel nonetheless. Elena's eyes searched my face, and I found myself leaning slightly forward, drawn by something I couldn't name. Then Elena's phone rang. We both jumped, the spell broken. Elena reached for her phone with hands that weren't quite steady. "It's David," she said. Glancing at the screen, she looked at me apologetically. "I should take this, of course." I moved back to the couch while Elena answered the call, but I could still hear her side of the conversation. "Hi, ... No, Jake's at work. I told you that yesterday. What do you mean, you forgot?" Her tone grew increasingly tense as the call continued. I tried not to listen, focusing instead on my wine and the rain that had started pattering against the windows. But it was impossible not to notice the way Elena's shoulders grew rigid, the way her free hand clenched into a fist. "David, we talked about this, ... No, I can't just drop everything, ... because I have a life here too, ... The conversation went on for nearly 10 minutes, Elena's voice growing sharper with each exchange. Finally, she hung up and sat in silence for a moment, staring at her phone. "Everything okay?" I asked gently. Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. "He forgot about Jake's parent-teacher conference tomorrow. Wants me to reschedule it because he double-booked himself with a client dinner." "Can you reschedule?" "That's not the point." Elena set her phone down harder than necessary. "The point is that he assumes I'll handle everything, that my schedule is infinitely flexible, while his is carved in stone. The point is that he forgot about his own son's conference and somehow made it my fault for not reminding him." I could see the frustration radiating from her, the anger she was trying to contain. Without thinking, I moved back to the chair beside her. "I'm sorry," I said. "You don't have anything to apologize for. I know. I'm sorry you have to deal with that." Elena looked at me, and something in her expression softened. "Thank you. That's exactly what I needed to hear." We sat in silence for a moment, the tension from the phone call slowly dissipating. Outside, the rain had intensified, drumming steadily against the windows. The living room felt warm and intimate in contrast to the storm, lit only by a few lamps. That cast everything in golden light. "I should probably go," I said, though I made no move to leave. "It's getting late." Probably Elena agreed, but she didn't seem eager for me to leave either. Double quotes, unless ... if you want company for a while. Longer. "I'd like that," she said quietly. "I'd like that very much." So I stayed. We talked about lighter things. Books we'd read, movies we'd loved, places we wanted to travel. Lena told me about her college years, her dreams of backpacking through Europe, her semester studying abroad in Prague. I told her about my plans for graduate school, my hope of maybe working overseas someday, my secret ambition to write a novel, even though I was terrible at creative writing. As the evening wore on, I became increasingly aware of small things, the way Elena tucked her feet under her when she got comfortable, sound of her laugh genuinely delighted rather than politely amused. The way she leaned forward when she was making a point, her eyes bright with passion for whatever topic we were discussing, and I became aware of the way she looked at me, as if I were someone worth paying attention to. It was intoxicating in a way I'd never experienced before. At some point, we'd moved closer together on the couch without quite realizing it. When Elena reached across me to set her wine glass on the side table, her arm brushed against my chest, and I caught my breath at the contact. She paused, her face inches from mine, and for a heartbeat I thought ... But then she pulled back, settling into her corner of the couch with careful distance between us. "It's after 11, she said, glancing at the clock on the mantel. "You should probably head back to campus, right?" Of course, trying to ignore the disappointment that settled in my chest. Elena walked me to the door, and I found myself moving slowly, reluctant to end the evening. "Thank you," I said as I put on my jacket. For dinner, for the conversation, for ... everything. "Thank you for staying." It was exactly what I needed tonight. She stepped closer to give me a goodbye hug, something she'd done countless times over the years, but this hug was different. Longer, closer, her arms wrapped around my shoulders rather than the quick, maternal embraces I was used to. I could feel the warmth of her body against mine, smell her perfume, feel her breath soft against my neck. When we pulled apart, we were still standing close, her hands resting lightly on my arms. For a moment, we just looked at each other, and I was certain she could hear my heart pounding. "Shh. Drive safely," she said softly. "I will." But I didn't move toward the door. Neither did she. "Alex," she said, and something in her voice made me look directly into her eyes. Yeah. For a moment, I thought she was going to say something important, something that would change everything between us. Instead, she stepped back, breaking the spell. Nothing. Just ... Thank you for listening tonight, anytime. And as I walked back to my car through the rain, I realized I meant it more than I'd ever meant anything in my life. The weeks that followed our dinner together became a kind of exquisite torture. I found myself checking my phone obsessively, hoping for texts from Alina that came more frequently than they should have. What started as innocent messages about Jake's schedule had evolved into something else entirely. "How did your AI ethics presentation go?" "Saw an article about environmental tech startups?" Made me think of our conversation. "Hope you're not staying up too late studying." Someone needs to remind you to take care of yourself. Each message felt like a small secret we were sharing. A connection that existed outside of my friendship with Jake. I told myself I was reading too much into it. But the way she signed her texts, just E, instead of Alina or Mrs. Chen, felt intimate in a way that made my chest tight. I wasn't sleeping well. My grades were suffering. During lectures, I'd find myself replaying conversations with Alina instead of focusing on differential equations or philosophy readings. My roommate started asking if I was sick because I was so distracted so obviously. Somewhere else, even when I was physically present. The worst part was being around Jake. He'd make casual comments that felt like daggers to my conscience. "My mom really likes you, you know," he said one afternoon as we walked across campus. "She's always asking about you, how your classes are going, whether you're eating enough. I think she wishes I was more like you sometimes." "That's not true," I said, but the words felt hollow. "It is, though. Should see how she lights up when you come over. It's nice, actually. She's been happier lately, more like her old self." The guilt was eating me alive. Jake trusted me completely, had no reason not to. He'd even started joking about how I was becoming like a second son to his mother. How Alina probably knew more about my college experience than my own parents did. Wasn't wrong. But even as the guilt consumed me, I couldn't bring myself to stop. Every time I decided to distance myself from Alina, to let the friendship visits fade naturally, she'd send another message or Jake would mention that she'd asked about me, and my resolve would crumble. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in early November. Jake's father had left for a 3-week business trip to Singapore, and Alina had texted me earlier that day. "David's gone until the end of the month. House feels like a mausoleum. Any chance you'd want to come over for dinner?" I promised to make something less elaborate than last time. I stared at the message for 20 minutes before responding. This was my chance to establish boundaries, to step back from whatever was happening between us before it went too far. "I'll be there at 7. Alina answered the door in dark jeans and a soft gray sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked beautiful and tired and somehow fragile in a way that made me want to wrap her in my arms before she'd even said hello. "I'm so glad you came," she said, and there was a relief in her voice that suggested she hadn't been sure I would. Dinner was simple. Grilled chicken and vegetables, nothing fancy, but the conversation was deeper than ever. Alina told me about her college roommate who'd just started her own environmental consulting firm at 45. She talked about dreams deferred and the fear that it might be too late to reclaim them. Found myself sharing things I'd never told anyone, my anxiety about living up to expectations, my fear that I was too idealistic for the real world, complicated relationship with my parents' definition of success. We moved to the living room with wine, settling into our usual spots on the couch. But tonight felt different. More charged, more dangerous. Elena seemed to feel it too. She kept fidgeting with her wine glass, tucking her hair behind her ear, avoiding prolonged eye contact. "Can I tell you something?" she said suddenly, after we'd been sitting in comfortable silence for several minutes. "Of course." She took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "I look forward to your visits more than I should." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. I felt my heart start to race. "Elena, ... I know it's inappropriate. I know you're Jake's friend, and I'm old enough to be your mother. And there are a dozen reasons why I shouldn't be saying this." She was talking quickly now, as if afraid she'd lose her nerve. "But I can't pretend anymore that these conversations don't mean something to me, that you don't mean something to me." I set down my wine glass with hands that weren't quite steady. "You mean something to me, too." "This is impossible," she said, but she was looking directly at me now, her dark eyes searching my face. "I know. You're 19 years old. I know that, too. Jake, ... I know." I leaned forward, closing some of the distance between us. "I've been trying to stay away. I've been telling myself all the reasons why this is a terrible idea." "What reasons?" she asked softly. "You're married. You're my best friend's mother. You're brilliant and accomplished, and I'm just a college sophomore who doesn't know anything about the real world." I paused, meeting her eyes.
But none of those
"Reasons seem to matter when I'm with you." Elena's breath caught. "Alex, ... I think about you all the time," I admitted, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "I think about talking to you, about making you laugh, about the way you listen to me like what I'm saying actually matters. I think about you when I should be studying, when I'm supposed to be paying attention in class, when I'm lying in bed at night trying to sleep." "You shouldn't," she whispered, but she didn't pull away when I moved closer. "I know I shouldn't, but I can't help it." We were sitting very close now, close enough that I could see the pulse fluttering at the base of her throat, close enough to count her eyelashes. Elena's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I've been so lonely," she said quietly, "for so long. And then you walked into my life and reminded me what it felt like to be seen, really seen, by another person." "I see you," I said, reaching up to touch her face gently. "I see how brilliant you are, how kind, how much you have to offer the world. I see how you light up when you talk about things you're passionate about. I see how you've sacrificed parts of yourself for other people's happiness." A tear slipped down her cheek and I brushed it away with my thumb. "This is crazy," she breathed. "I know. We can't." "I know." But neither of us moved away. Instead, Elena leaned into my touch, her eyes fluttering closed. When she opened them again, something had shifted. The careful distance she'd maintained was gone, replaced by something raw and honest that took my breath away. "Alex," she said, and my name sounded different in her voice. It's not like Jake's friend, not like the boy she'd known for years. Like someone she was choosing, someone she wanted. I leaned forward slowly, giving her time to stop me, to come to her senses, to remember all the reasons this was impossible. Instead, she met me halfway. Our lips touched gently, tentatively, as if we were both afraid the other might disappear. Elena's hand came up to rest against my chest, and I could feel my heart pounding against her palm. The kiss was soft, careful, full of question marks and possibilities. When we broke apart, we stayed close, foreheads touching, breathing the same air. "Oh God," Elena whispered. "What are we doing?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but I don't want to stop." She pulled back enough to look at me, her eyes wide and uncertain. "This changes everything. I know. Jake can never know. He won't. Not from me. This has to stay between us. Just us." Okay, double quotes. Elena searched my face, looking for something. Reassurance, maybe, or proof that I understood the magnitude of what we were agreeing to. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded slowly. "I've never done anything like this before," she said quietly. "Neither have I. I don't know how to do this. How to be whatever this is." I took her hands in mine, marveling at how perfectly they fit. "We don't have to figure it all out tonight. We just have to decide if we want to try. Do you?" To try? I thought about Jake, about the friendship I was potentially betraying. I thought about the complexity of Elena's marriage, the impossibility of our situation, all the ways this could end badly. Then I looked at her face, beautiful and vulnerable and hopeful, and knew there was only one answer I could give. "Yes," I said. "I want to try." Elena smiled then, the first genuinely happy smile I'd seen from her all evening. "So do I." We kissed again, longer this time, deeper. When we finally broke apart, Elena curled up against my side, her head on my shoulder, and I wrapped my arms around her. We sat like that for a long time, not talking, just holding each other and processing what had just happened. "I should feel guilty," Elena said eventually, her voice muffled against my shirt. "Do you?" She was quiet for a moment, considering. "Yes, but not as much as I should. Does that make me a terrible person?" "It makes you human." "What about you? Do you feel guilty?" I thought about it honestly. About Jake, yes. About this, with you, ... No, I know I should, but I don't. This feels too right to be wrong. Elena lifted her head to look at me. Even though it's complicated. Especially because it's complicated. She smiled at that. A soft, secret smile that was just for me. "You're going to get your heart broken, you know. We both are, probably. And you're okay with that?" I looked down at her face, peaceful and beautiful in the lamplight, and realized I'd never been more certain of anything in my life. "If it's with you," I said, "I'm okay with that." The weeks that followed our first kiss became an intricate dance of careful timing and stolen moments. Elena and I developed an unspoken system of communication, text messages disguised as innocent check-ins. Subtle glances when Jake was in the room, the entire vocabulary of looks that meant "I wish we were alone," or "later," or simply "I'm thinking about you too." Jake's work schedule at Best Buy became as familiar to me as my own class timetable. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, Saturday afternoons, the occasional Sunday morning shift, these became our windows of opportunity. I'd find reasons to stop by the house during these times, armed with plausible excuses, returning a borrowed textbook, picking up notes Jake had left for me, checking on Elena when she mentioned feeling under the weather. The deception came easier than I'd expected, which worried me almost as much as the relationship itself. "You've been spending a lot of time at our house lately," Jake observed one afternoon as we grabbed lunch between classes. "Not that I'm complaining. My mom loves the company. But don't you have better things to do than hang out with a middle-aged woman?" If only he knew how much better I couldn't imagine. "She's good company," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "And she's been helping me figure out some career stuff. Her corporate experience is actually really valuable." This wasn't entirely a lie. Elena had become my unofficial mentor, helping me navigate the professional world I was still years away from entering. She reviewed my resume, gave me advice on internship applications, shared insights about corporate culture that I'd never get from textbooks or professors. But these practical conversations had become the safe harbor between moments of deeper intimacy. We'd discuss my future while cooking dinner together. Elena standing close enough that I could smell her perfume as she showed me how to properly dice an onion. We'd review cover letters curled up on the couch, her head on my shoulder. She'd pointed out phrases that needed work. Every innocent interaction was layered with awareness of each other, charged with the electricity of keeping secrets. "She does seem happier lately," Jake continued, stirring sugar into his coffee. "More like herself, if that makes sense.
Ow.
She's been cooking more, smiling more.
Ow.
Dad even commented on it during their last video call." The mention of Elena's husband sent a familiar stab of guilt through my chest. David Chen remained a distant figure in my understanding of Elena's life, more concept than person, known to me mainly through Elena's carefully neutral references and the family photos scattered throughout the house. But his absence had become the foundation of our relationship, and I was uncomfortably aware that I was rooting for his continued travel schedule. "Maybe she's just adjusting to having more independence," I suggested. "Maybe. Or maybe having you around reminds her of when I was younger, when she felt more needed." Jake smiled at me with the kind of open affection that made my stomach twist. "Either way, I'm grateful. You're good for her. If only you knew how good," I thought, and immediately hated myself for it. The guilt was a constant companion now, sitting heavy in my chest during every interaction with Jake, but it was matched by something else, a sense of rightness when I was with Alina that I'd never experienced before. She made me feel older, more sophisticated, more capable than I actually was. In her eyes, I wasn't just Jake's awkward friend or a college sophomore fumbling through life. I was someone worth confiding in, worth caring about, worth choosing. And Alina was transforming too. The tired, resigned woman I'd first had a real conversation with was gradually being replaced by someone more vibrant, more confident. She laughed more easily, spoke with greater conviction about her ideas, carried herself with a subtle pride that hadn't been there before. "You make me feel like myself again," she told me one Tuesday evening as we prepared dinner together. I'd forgotten what that felt like. We were making stir-fry, Alina teaching me her technique for getting the vegetables perfectly crisp. She stood behind me as I worked at the stove, her hands covering mine on the spatula, guiding my movements. It was such a domestic moment, intimate and ordinary at the same time. "Which self?" I asked, leaning back slightly so I could feel the warmth of her body against mine. The one who had opinions about things, who wanted to change the world instead of just surviving it. She pressed a soft kiss to the back of my neck. The one who believed she was worth paying attention to. "You're worth paying attention to. You make me believe that." These were the moments I treasured most, not the stolen kisses or careful touches, but the quiet conversations where Alina revealed pieces of herself she'd kept hidden for years. She told me about the environmental science degree she'd abandoned, about the novels she'd started writing in college, about the dreams she'd put on hold until they'd become too distant to reach for. In return, I found myself sharing ambitions I'd never voiced aloud, fears about failure that I'd never admitted even to myself. Alina listened with the kind of attention that made me feel heard in ways I'd never experienced. She asked the right questions, offered insights that challenged my assumptions, believed in possibilities I'd been too afraid to consider. But our relationship existed in carefully constructed bubbles of time and space. When Jake was home, Alina and I reverted to our old roles, friendly but appropriately distant. Her maternal and me, respectfully appreciative of her hospitality, we became actors playing ourselves, performing a version of our relationship that was safe for public consumption. The strain of constant performance was exhausting. One Saturday afternoon, Jake decided to stay home and study instead of going to work, throwing off our usual routine. I'd already texted Alina that I was coming over, and she'd responded with excitement about trying a new recipe together. When I arrived to find Jake's car in the driveway, my heart sank. "Hey man," Jake said, opening the door with a textbook in his hand. Perfect timing. "I'm drowning in macroeconomics and could use someone to bounce ideas off." "Of course," I said, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. Alina appeared in the kitchen doorway, and our eyes met for just a moment. I saw the same disappointment I felt reflected in her expression, quickly masked by a bright smile. "Alex, I didn't know you were coming over. I just started making cookies if you boys want some study fuel." "That sounds perfect, Mom, thanks." The afternoon passed slowly. Jake and I spread our textbooks across the dining room table while Alina moved around the kitchen, the sounds of her baking providing a domestic soundtrack to our studying. Every so often, she'd bring us fresh cookies or refill our coffee mugs, and I'd catch subtle signs of the woman I'd grown close to, a lingering touch on my shoulder, a smile that lasted a beat too long, fingers that brushed mine as she set down my cup. But mostly, she was Jake's mom. Warm, caring, appropriately maternal. The woman who'd kissed me so tenderly just 2 days earlier might as well have been a figment of my imagination. "Your mom's in a really good mood," I observed during a study break, watching Alina hum softly as she cleaned up the kitchen. "I know, right? Dad's going to be so surprised when he gets back. She's like a completely different person than when he left." The irony wasn't lost on me. Alina's happiness during her husband's absence was directly related to my presence in her life, but Jake attributed it to newfound independence rather than a secret relationship with his best friend. Later that evening, after Jake had gone upstairs to shower, Alina and I found ourselves alone in the kitchen for the first time all day. Without thinking, I moved toward her, drawn by hours of forced distance. "We can't," she whispered, even as she leaned into me. He could come downstairs. I know. I missed you today. I missed you too. We stood close together, not quite touching, sharing the same air, but unable to close the final distance between us. It was torture and comfort at the same time. Being near her, but unable to show it, wanting her but having to pretend indifference. This is getting harder, Alina said quietly. The pretending? All of it. The scheduling, the secrets, the constant awareness of what we can and can't do. She looked up at me with tired eyes. I don't regret this, Alex. I want you to know that. But it's more complicated than I expected. What are you saying? I'm not saying anything. I'm just acknowledging the complexity. But I could see the strain in her face, the weight of maintaining a double life. I felt it too. The exhaustion of being constantly careful, constantly alert to who might see or hear or suspect. We'll figure it out, I said, though I wasn't sure. How will we? Before I could answer, we heard Jake's footsteps on the stairs. Alina stepped back, putting appropriate distance between us, and began wiping down counters that were already clean. Thanks for the cookies, Mrs. Chen, I called out, loud enough for Jake to hear. Anytime, Alex, she replied, her voice perfectly calibrated to sound maternal rather than intimate. Jake appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair still damp from a shower. You heading out? Yeah, I should get back to campus. I'll walk you out. As Jake and I said our goodbyes on the front porch, I could see Alina through the kitchen window, her back to us as she continued cleaning. She looked small and lonely, and I wanted nothing more than to go back inside and hold her. Instead, I clapped Jake on the shoulder and told him I'd see him tomorrow, carrying the weight of our secret with me as I walked back to my car. The relationship that had started as an unexpected connection was becoming something more complex, more demanding. We were no longer just two people who'd found comfort in each other. We were conspirators, bound together by choices that grew more complicated with each passing day. And despite Elena's questions about sustainability, despite my own growing guilt about Jake, I knew I wasn't ready to let go. Whatever the cost, whatever the complications, I wanted more time in Elena's orbit. Even if it meant living in the spaces between truth and deception, stealing moments of authenticity in a relationship built on secrets,